Have you ever cooked a steak to less than stellar results?
This steak is terrible. Is there anyone that can help me cook this better?
I heard you're looking for help.
Yes, but who are you?
I'm your cook buddy. I'll show you the best way to cook a perfect steak. Every time. After watching this video, you will know the best way to perfectly cook a steak. Every time. With the method I'm about to show you, you don't need years of experience cooking steak, or need to play the poke the steak game to guess its doneness. Before we start cooking, we first need to define what we mean by a perfectly cooked steak. For this video, we will judge based on three criteria. First, is there a deep brown crust on the entire surface of the steak? Second, is the desired meat doneness consistent throughout the steak? Third, is gray band minimized around the steak? The deep brown crust you get on a steak after searing gives additional flavor. So to maximize the deliciousness of the steak, we want the entire surface to be deep brown. We also want the meat tenderness to be consistent, so the internal temperature should be the same throughout the steak. We don't want any chewy or dry steak. Lastly, a gray band around the steak indicates the meat is overcooked in those gray areas. We want the meat tenderness to be consistent throughout, so the gray band should be minimized. The common method of cooking steak just in a pan tends to yield noticeable gray banding and uneven temperature inside. The temperature of the steak will get lower as you go toward the center. You could use the oven to help mitigate this, but there will still be some gray banding, and you run the risk of drying out your steak. The solution to all this is a not so secret cooking method called sous vide. Sous vide is simply the process of cooking food in a water bath at a set temperature. Typically, the food is vacuum sealed in a plastic bag before cooking in water. So, how does sous vide help us? Well, since the cooking water is held at a constant temperature, the food will never go above it and therefore never overcooks. Secondly, sous vide is a gentle and gradual cooking method which allows meat to retain a lot of its moisture, resulting in the most succulent steak you will ever have. Now that we know the method to cook a perfect steak, let's see the ingredients and equipment we'll need. Today, we're using a 1.5-inch strip steak, dried thyme or dried rosemary, garlic, butter, black pepper, and salt. The equipment we're using is a stainless steel pan, a large pot to hold water while cooking sous vide, a sous vide machine, and a sealable plastic bag for the steak. If you don't have a vacuum sealer like this one, you can use a sealable plastic bag instead. Now that we have all the ingredients and equipment, we can start preparing our steak. We're going to sous vide our steak first, since it will take the longest. We'll season the steak with salt and pepper on both sides. Then we'll place it in a sealable bag. Completely submerge the steak underwater to try and remove as much air as possible. Then seal the bag. We're aiming for a medium rare steak which is between 130 and 135 Fahrenheit internally. We'll set our sous vide temperature to 130 Fahrenheit and place our steak in the water for 1.5 hours. Next, we'll cut 2 cloves of garlic into thin slices. Then, we'll roughly cut 1 ounce of butter into cubes. Since there's still over an hour left for the steak to sous vide, you can go catch up on the latest Netflix show you're binge watching. After 1.5 hours, take the steak out of the bag and dry the surface as much as possible with paper towel. Remember, the less moisture that is on the surface, the better crust we will get on the steak when we sear it. We don't want to sear the steak immediately after sous vide because this will result in more gray banding since the steak is still hot from cooking in the water. To solve this, we're going to put the steak in the fridge uncovered for 15 minutes. This will help cool down the steak, which gives us more time to sear before gray bands appear. This step will also help remove moisture from the steak. You can even leave it in the fridge for a day to get an even better crust. After the steak has cooled down, heat 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil in a pan on high heat. When the oil begins to smoke, put your steak in and press down on it so that the entire surface is in contact with the pan. This will help maximize the crust on the steak. Sear for 30 seconds, then flip and sear the other side for 30 seconds. Remember, the entire steak is already cooked perfectly medium rare from sous vide. Our goal in the pan is to get a good crust while minimizing the gray band, so we only sear for 30 seconds on each side. Sear both edges as well for 30 seconds. Then add the butter, garlic, rosemary, black pepper, and cook for 30 seconds. Tilt the pan and baste both sides for 10 seconds with the butter. At this point, the steak is ready to eat. You don't need to let it rest because most of the juices inside have already been reabsorbed during the sous vide process. Now for the moment of truth. Let's see if we meet our 3 criteria for a perfectly cooked steak. Firstly, did we get a deep brown crust on the entire surface? While we didn't get 100% crust coverage, we did get over 90% of the steak seared nicely. So I'd say we did well with this criteria. Secondly, is the desired meat doneness consistent throughout the steak? We definitely met this criteria because sous vide took care of this for us, and we didn't overcook the steak in the pan. Thirdly, did we minimize the gray band around the steak? To help us judge this criteria more fairly, I cooked another steak to medium rare just using a pan without sous vide to compare the difference in gray bands. Comparing both steaks, we can see that the sous vide steak has less gray band than the pan cooked one. Note that you're going to have gray bands no matter what, unless you don't sear the steak at all. However, using sous vide and properly drying the surface of a steak allows us to sear for a shorter period of time, which minimizes gray banding. We were able to reduce gray banding using this method, so we definitely passed this test as well. This video wouldn't be complete without a taste test. In terms of flavor, both steaks are delicious. The main difference is that the sous vide steak is noticeably more tender and smooth to eat. Overall, the sous vide steak takes the victory over the pan-cooked steak. I think we've demonstrated that sous vide is the best foolproof way to perfectly cook a steak every time. Using this method, you don't need to babysit a steak or worry about over or undercooking it. This isn't to say that pan cooking a steak is bad, but if you want a precise and superior cook without any guesswork, sous vide is the way to go. If you found value in this video and would like to see more videos on steak, such as cooking myths or in-depth tips to cook a great steak, let me know in the comments.